Three, two, one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Universal Peace Federation webinar today. UPF is an international and interreligious network of individuals and organizations, which includes representatives from religion, government, civil society, and the private sector. And our program today is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, which we refer to as IMAP. And our moderator today is Jennifer Trench. Jennifer has spent her career exploring journalism, publishing, and graphic design, advertising, and photography. Guided by curiosity, creativity, and a desire to influence public opinion for the better. In the 1980s, she co-founded the Newswatchers Network, a newsletter dedicated to calling out media bias through sharp, accessible analysis. She is honored to re-enter the media arena with IMAP, lending her voice.
Ray, you muted yourself.
Jennifer lives in the Berkshire Mountains in Western Massachusetts with her beloved cat Ivan and cherishes time with her 3 children and 8 grandchildren. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Ray. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Trench, and I'm happy to welcome you to our monthly IMAP webinar. I'm so glad you could join us today. Today, we're taking a look back at how the news world emerged in the turbulent 70s, as a lone conservative voice in New York City, and how its successor, the Washington Times, founded in Washington, D.C., on May 17, 1982, helped reshape the American media landscape during the Cold War and beyond. And we will explore why that alternative voice still matters today. In preparation for our broadcast, I asked our speakers to provide their bios, and the first line of Francesca's bio has now become my inspiration for our webinar today, and I quote, I'm sorry, my speakers aren't working here. "You are the ears and eyes of God," unquote. Francesca heard those words from Reverend Sun Myung Moon in 1975 in the Newsworld newsroom. She looked around the room, smiling through her tears, knowing she had finally found her true mission in journalism. I believe those words sum up the spirit of the news world and the Washington Times. Remember, he was speaking to a room full of reporters. So I would also like to conjecture that the media can and should be not only the eyes and ears of God, but also be his voice and take on the responsibilities called for by that mission. The scroll button isn't working. Has time fulfilled Reverend Moon's expectations for the papers? I think it has gone a long way to do so during the last almost 49 years, and I am sure, as their founding father, he would be very proud of them. I hope that it can continue fulfilling that mission for a long time to come, because it matters. Today's format will be an informal roundtable discussion. So no prepared presentations, obviously, just authentic storytelling and reflection. Through our distinguished guests' personal experiences, their battles and their breakthroughs, and their understanding of their founder's vision, I hope we can gain deeper insight into why these newspapers were created, the national mood of the time, and how their legacy still shapes the media and our historical narrative today. Let me see here. By the way, I was going to put something into the chat, and I will do that right now, if I can get back to my screen. Sorry about that. Where's my Zoom video? Lost Zoom. Can you still hear me, guys?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm so sorry, people.
Chat should be at the bottom.
Yeah, it's shrunk. Sorry about that. This is a day of mistaken identities here.
It's only a movie. Don't let it shake you.
Yeah, right. Okay, I've lost my ability to do this for some reason. My scroll button's not working. Okay. Today's format will be an informal roundtable discussion, which I've just said, and through our distinguished guests, we can understand how their experiences affected their experience, their view of the newsletters. And now to our speakers. Francesca Simon first began reporting, there she is, in 1974 at Rosary College in Chicago for the school's newspaper, and in 1975 joined the Chicago Tribune. But she soon felt called toward something greater, which led her to the news world and then to its launch in New York City. She started on the city desk. She covered community stories before being assigned to the New York Police Headquarters, where she worked among reporters from the New York Times, the Daily News, and the New York Post, the only woman and the only person of color on the day shift, and probably the only conservative in the group as well. In 1981, she moved into broadcast journalism. She began at 60 Minutes, assisting Andy Rooney, and soon joined the CBS Morning News, where she worked and learned alongside Diane Sawyer and Charles Kuralt, producing live segments, researching stories, and preparing guests for On Culture, for On something here.
Camera.
Thank
On
you.
camera interviews.
For interviews. After leaving CBS in 1986, Francesca wrote freelance pieces for the New York Daily News, the magazine Essence, and many lifestyle and cultural outlets. She returned to full-time journalism in 1998 at the Washington Times, where she created international country report inserts. Her assignments took her across Africa and Europe, interviewing heads of state, foreign ministers, business leaders, and everyday citizens, while also writing, editing, photographing, and assisting with layout. Later, she returned to New York to continue freelance work and to cover New York Fashion Week. She also began teaching a workshop called A Mystical Approach to Writing, blending journalism with meditative practice. Very interesting. After relocating to Sarasota, Florida in 2016, she co-hosted a radio program called Charting Your Course. I love this part, exploring spirituality, mysticism, tarot, astrology, and numerology, and worked as a community reporter for WSLR Radio. She also served as president of the Sarasota branch of the National League of American Pen Women, that's PEN Women, founded in 1897. Today, Francesca continues her artistic pursuits as a professional calligrapher, while also exploring drawing and painting. I would like to hear more about her media journey, and there's much more, and her highlights and lowlights of her varied career. So please join me in welcoming the multi-talented Francesca Simon.
Hello.
Can you give us a few words?
Yes. Well, I'm just very, very honored to be able to participate in this forum, because as I'm looking at the world as it is now, I have a greater appreciation for the news world and the Washington Times and my role in it as a player on that field of looking for community and unity and truth. So that's why I'm happy to be here. And you can ask me anything you want. Or do you just want, I don't know if you want me to just run down how I became involved, or you ask me whatever questions you wish and I will answer you.
Well, from the start, you got involved because you were unhappy working in Chicago, right?
Yes, Chicago was a very, very prejudiced city then.
Mhm.
I had gone to college at a very prominent college that had been it was one of the first women colleges in the United States, and it was out in the very rich suburbs. And there was little chocolate me out there. And I went there because of being part of the National Merit Program. And so colleges were pursuing me. And I wanted to keep my focus on my spiritual life. So I purposely chose that Catholic college taught by nuns.
Mm.
And so that gave me my foundation, because first and foremost, I'm a spiritual being. And anything else that happens is because God has directed me to go in that direction. So I've been writing since I was like 7 years old, keeping a journal. I don't know what I was writing about, living in Bowling Green, Kentucky as a little poor Black girl in the segregated South. So that lets you know a little bit about how my mind works, regardless of how other people treat me. My strength comes from my knowledge and experience with divinity.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so how did you hear about the News World?
I was looking through newspaper ads. I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. I was freelancing as a public relations person,
Mm.
and I enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I had written about I did all the public relations for a special on Mahalia Jackson. It was a film made on Mahalia Jackson, and I really loved doing that. So as a journalist, you learn to deal with public relations people, so you know what their job is and how to do it. So that's how I got into public relations. And I was looking through the newspaper and saying, what do I want to do now? And I said, I think I want to travel. And so I saw this ad about humanitarian organization seeking, I don't know exactly how they're worded, or people who want to travel in the world and be of service to humanity, was basically what that ended up to be. And it was actually an ad from the Unification Church. And so when I began to ask them questions about what this meant, and they told me it was with the Unification Church, and of course, I'd heard of it, and I was like, but it was very questionable, and there were a lot of people who were very concerned about their children that were in, the Unification Church, and I said, well, either this is going to be a grand adventure, or it's going to be a great expose. And so when they told me that they were starting a newspaper in New York, and I said, well, I'm a journalist, so I would be very interested in that. And so I packed up from Chicago, and I forget where they first sent me, because you had to have a training, and I went through this 40-day workshop out on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And because I was a spiritual person, I'd had my own mystical and psychic experiences since childhood. I understood a lot of what was being taught, for numerology, for instance, and all of the numbers in the Bible and what they mean. I think
Yeah.
Cheryl Wetstein was a great lecturer on that. So that was right up my alley. I put God first. And anytime I could learn about God and be around people who were interested in really being channels for divinity, then that's where I wanted to be.
Right.
And so finally in 1974, I think I went there in September. And that is when they put us to work restoring the New Yorker Hotel, because that's where the first offices were. So I had to learn how to paint and pull and do all of this crazy stuff that I had never, ever done in my life. But I enjoyed it because there were wonderful people. Melanie Pinholster, who is now Melanie Taylor, was my first roommate. And I just spent a month with her over the summer. So that 50-year friendship has remained as it has with other members of the newspaper. And that makes me very happy. So then at the end of 1975, 1975, Reverend Moon purchased this fabulous office on Fifth Avenue, of all places, right in the midst of Lord and Taylor and all of these fancy stores on Fifth Avenue. And that's where our main offices were. And that is where he came to open it up. And he said, "You are the ears and eyes of God." And I have always felt that. And I have built my career on that one sentence. That is how I live. And I'm just very, very grateful for that opportunity.
That was my favorite sentence from your bio. And I woke up this morning at 5:30 and I said, that's it. That's basically the spirit of this webinar and why we were here to give honor to that starting, that wonderful start to the news world and the Washington Times. So it continued from the news world to the Washington Times. So maybe you can, I don't know if you want to fill it in between that time period, but I'd like to hear how your journey, went from the news world to the Washington Times. But meanwhile, what impact do you think the news world, first of all, had in New York City? Do you think it had a good impact there?
It really, really did, because we had newspaper boys and girls on the streets selling the newspaper,
Right.
which was quite something. And because it was so controversial, it was a real challenging experience for anyone who was writing for the paper. I had people who would not allow me to do interviews
Right.
because of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and these even religious people, especially, And so I just took it with a grain of salt. And I said, I will go where God sends me. And because I love people, I just went out in the streets, and whatever assignment they sent me on, I went happily. I started off doing a lot of community reporting, because the newspaper offered an opportunity for the Black community in New York to have a voice, and in the sense of stories being covered. And so I did a lot of reporting in Harlem and on Black organizations, and covering, mayoral races where Percy Sutton, a man of color, was running for mayor. So I did a lot of political reporting that had to do with the Black community as well. But I also did restaurant reviews and a little bit of entertainment. We did whatever we needed to do because we were starting off small. And because of my previous experience, I was up for anything. A good journalist can cover anything. It's not like it is at the time of specialization. A good journalist should be able to know how to go in, talk to people, get the facts, and write it down. And that's what it was all about. So I really, really enjoyed all of my assignments at the News World, except when they sent me to police headquarters.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
I had written a story about a homeless woman who'd been set on fire in the subway. And when I went to the press conference, of course, it was just packed with all major media everywhere. But for me, it was a deeply emotional experience to think about this woman being set on fire. And so while the press gathering was going on, and they were speaking and giving the facts, blah, 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 I said, God, there's another story here. Help me, show me what I can do, because I want to be by this woman's side and let her know that somebody really, really cares. And I don't know how I did it. I don't remember. I snuck into the hospital. I found the woman and her room. Before that, I went and I bought her flowers, and I went by her bedside. She was bandaged from head to toe, and I just put my hands on her. I almost cried because it was so moving for me. And I just said, people love you, and I'm so sorry that this happened to you, and God will help you. And you will be healed and you'll be able to go on with your life. Don't think nobody cares. And that's the story that I wrote. And when I went back the next day after that article ran, Tommy Zumbo, who was our editor, he was amazing. He was an old veteran from the Daily News, a real newspaper man. And he was really hard. And he said, Francesca, I have some news for you. We're sending you to police headquarters. And I said, for what? And he said, to cover police stories. And I started literally crying in the news world. I was like, Tommy, I can't do it. Please don't send me. I'm too emotional, blah, blah, blah. He said, Francesca, you're going. You have the knowledge and the heart to do it. And that's why we want you there, because you're going to cover the stories differently than anybody else that's there.
Mm.
So I had to dry my tears, and I begrudgingly went. I had my own little office. The Daily News had four or five reporters on duty during the day. Next door with me were the New York Times, and then down a little ways was the New York Post. And I was the only woman and the only person of color. And they were polite enough, but they really did kind of haze me a bit. You know, they would, have out dirty magazines and just all kinds of stuff just to punch me, to test me, to push me. And that just wasn't going to work because I've been a Black woman all my life. So there's nothing you can do to me. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. And so finally they did lighten up. And they embraced me as their own. And they even took me to lunch. I have to tell you this funny story. They took me to lunch in Chinatown because police headquarters is right next to Chinatown. And they said, well, we're treating you to lunch. And so the first thing they did was to bring out this giant bowl of soup, and floating in it were chicken feet floating on top. And of course I screamed. Because it was part of their hazing, even though I've been a country girl, chicken feet, and no, that wasn't happening. So they had a lot of fun with me, but I grew to love them all, and they grew to appreciate my skills.
Well, your stories, I think I could listen to forever, but I want to be sure we get to the Washington Times eventually. But meanwhile, you went on CBS. You were with On the Road with Charles Kuralt, and you were
No, I didn't. No, I did not go. Charles Kuralt came off of the road and was assigned to CBS Morning News. So let me just back up.
Okay.
I left the news world in 1981 because the woman who was in charge of the press for police headquarters said, you need to be on camera and I will be your mentor. And she was a former television reporter. And she said, you really should do this. I'm leaving the police department. I'm going to start a new show. And once I get the show set up, I'm going to bring you on to the staff and I will be your mentor and train you. So I was like, well, I'm not really interested in television. She said, Francesca, I think you should do it. So she went, her name was Ellen Fletcher, and she ran into a problem with the show. So she didn't, the show wasn't successful because they weren't doing things up above board, unfortunately. So I said, well, okay, then that's fine. But it just kept going in my head. You're supposed to be doing television. And so that's why I left the news world. I had no money. I had to find another place to live. And I didn't know where to start. Everybody just said, just get in the door. So I resigned. By the end of the day, one brother had given me $100. Another sister had told me they were looking for a news a roommate. So I had money and a place to stay. And for 3 days, I fasted and prayed and asked God to guide me. And that third day, I finally got out of bed because I was told to go and get the New York Times. I went and I got the New York Times, opened it up to that page. I opened it up to the page, and then it said, go to that place. And it was a temp agency because I was a good typist, of course. And I went there and I took all the tests. And the person said, I don't know why you're here. You've been a journalist here in New York for the past 5 years. Why in the world do you want to be a secretary? I said, because I like eating and I want to keep eating. But yes, I am interested in television. But we have CBS as a client. I'll look out for you. And that's how I got to be an assistant to Andy Rooney. God opened that door. His secretary was in China for 6 weeks. And then he asked me what I wanted to do. He saw my background. And then he got me moved over to CBS Morning News because Diane Sawyer needed an assistant. And so that's how I got to CBS News. I sat right outside her desk. I took care of her calendar and I watched her like a hawk. I was in the studio every morning before 7 o'clock when the show started. So that's how I left the news world. I was at CBS News for 5 years. And then
Wow.
I decided that I wanted to be a freelance, to freelance, because being the only, basically one of the few women of color, I faced a lot of prejudice and people were getting promoted over me. And I went to the president of CBS News and I said, this doesn't look right to me. And he said, no, I don't think anybody is really being prejudiced against you. And I said, well, okay, that's fine. He said, I'll look into it, Francesca. And so within that time, they asked everyone to write down what publications they were reading. New York Times, New York Post, USA Today, People Magazine. Everybody was reading the same thing. And you can't get good stories that way. And so they said, we're going to assign people what they should read. So write down everything that you read. I was reading the Atlanta Constitution, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Los Angeles Times, the Albuquerque Journal, Smithsonian Magazine, Omni Magazine, and all of these other things that nobody else was reading. And when they assigned me, they assigned me all of the Black publications, all of the Black newspapers, all of the Black magazines. And I went and slammed that paper down on the president of CBS desk. And I said, you're going to tell me this is not prejudice? And he was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me check into that. Well, needless to say, my contract was not renewed. And I was on my way out anyway because I wasn't going to take it. So I did freelance and I went back into freelance. I freelanced for the Daily News. I edited an entertainment magazine. I wrote for online because then, there were online publications. And then finally, in 1998, I said, the Washington Times has so much power in Washington, and that's where I'm from, but they're not doing enough community reporting. I'm going to move back to Washington. And I'm going to hit those streets because I went to high school there. I know that city.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to do. It took me 6 months to get in. I didn't ask anybody to help me. I didn't ask Cheryl to get me in. I didn't ask anybody. I went in the straight door and it took me 6 months to get in there, and I did, and I got assigned to the city desk. And that's how I got to the Washington Times. But I didn't stay there, because the editor felt that I was trying to take his job.
Yeah.
It's so hilarious. And I'm like, I don't want his job. I'm just trying to do my job well. I was ending up on the front page a lot, and he didn't like that. And so he says, well, what can we do? And I said, well, I'm not going to stay where I'm not wanted. I don't want his job. And that's why I left the Washington Times.
But meanwhile, you went to Europe, right? And did a lot of stories in Europe.
This is how God works. I said with my last day of work, I came into work with a suitcase. And everybody said, Francesca, where are you going? I said, oh, I'm catching a flight at London at 8 p.m. because I've decided I want to travel. And they were just, no, who comes into the last day of their job with a suitcase saying they're going off to travel? Usually you'd be looking for a job. Well, I'm crazy. So I said, no, I want to travel. So I've got to make this happen. I've got to do it. So I went to London. I stayed there with a member of the church. And he was going through a very, very difficult divorce. And we had been very good friends. He'd been a photographer on the news world. And so we had maintained that relationship from the news world. I keep my friends. And when I got back, I was talking to Peter Courtwright, who used to be in charge of all the distribution and all of that. And he said, you know, you should check over with Carl Hagen because they have an operation over there and they're doing country reports. And I think you would be great for that. And so I went and I spoke with Carl Hagen and he said, yes. That was in November. And by January, I was in the Gambia interviewing the president of the Gambia. And I was there for 7 weeks and had to come back, write my stories, and put that whole insert together. And I did that. I went to the Gambia. They sent me to Swaziland at the top of South Africa. I went to Denmark and Sweden. And it was wonderful, but it was hard work because, you know, everything you did was work. What you ate, where you went, who you talked to. It was pretty grueling, but it was wonderful, and I did enjoy it. But I was worn out. It wore me out. So I moved back to New York and took a break.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. As Frederick, or whatever his name was, said, Lawrence Welk. So Chris, I thought I might introduce Chris now so that he can give us a few versions of what he went through. And then maybe the two of you can get together and compare notes. So I'm going to ask Chris. And meanwhile, let me get his bio up here. Okay. Chris joined the news world at its inception in 1977, working in advertising and circulation before becoming a reporter and eventually an editor in Metro and Sports. He also wrote a popular tri-weekly outdoor column, Fishing Around, which gave him a welcome escape from the intensity of Manhattan because Chris needs to be out in nature. That's important to this guy. After 5 years at the paper, Chris pursued his passion for the outdoors, eventually pioneering a charter fishing industry in Alaska through Kodiak Island Charters. His family continues to operate 3 boats and spends winters in Henderson, Nevada. Chris and his wife and business partner, Jainan, raised 4 daughters and are now the proud grandparents of 10, soon to be 11, grandchildren. I'd like to ask Chris to share his insights into his experiences on the news world, the life of a newsman in the 70s, and how 30 years of fishing off the coast of an Alaskan island has deepened his appreciation of what we are trying to preserve in this beautiful land, how nature itself teaches us to align with the Creator's ideal and become good stewards of the world we've been given. A task that, incidentally, requires an informed populace and thus a media committed to promoting a healthy planet, along with strong family values and a truthful, unbiased presentation of the news of the day. So welcome, Chris.
Yo, hi, everybody. Greetings from Kodiak. And Francesca, that was amazing.
Crazy,
What
right?
a life you've had. It's crazy. But I remember you very well as a young girl on the newspaper back in 1977 when I joined the news world, actually the end of 76 after a really interesting year for our church. And I would have to start there. The fake news that was coined by Trump, I think it was fairly applicable back then, because as a young member of our church, we were much maligned by the news media, particularly the New York Times. And I just remember going through as a person helping to organize the rallies that we had for the bicentennial, which was created the Yankee Stadium rally for God in New York City in July of 76, the bicentennial rally that we had, and then the one in Washington Times, where I worked actively on both of them as a team leader in the cities. In Washington Times, I was in Bethesda and Rockville and Georgetown. That was my area where I was a team leader to organize that rally. And the idea was to celebrate God and to kind of recreate the founding spirit of America. So God was really the inspiration, I believe, behind the news media creation of the news world, because our Reverend Moon was inspired to create as my sister Jennifer, who I'm very proud of. The moderator happens to be my sister, just to let you know, the audience know, and she's the smart one in the family. So I'm the outdoor country bumpkin. Okay, so anyway, I was going back to, I want to report one thing that happened to us in Washington Times, or excuse me, in Washington, D.C., when we were doing the rally for the God Bless America Festival at the Monument. Our goal was to get about 300,000 people there to listen to Reverend Moon's vision for where America could go at this time, at this particular time, why it was so important to God. And we worked very hard at that, and particularly the Washington Post. I think the Washington Star was around then. It's folded later, but the radio channels, everything was persecuting us all day long as we were going door to door, trying to get people interested to come to the rally that we had, which was pretty spectacular. We had until then, I think we had the largest fireworks display ever. So I was kind of during that day of the rally, which was, I believe it was July 1st, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. This is my memory serves. 1976, I was at the end of the bus route. We chartered all these buses to bring people there. And I was at Georgetown, in Georgetown, at Wisconsin and M. That's kind of the very center of the Georgetown kind of liberal industry, or liberal neighborhood. And I was helping people get on the buses. I had to push them because the buses were so full of people. And when I went to the monument later, I saw this enormous crowd. My sister Jennifer was there with her husband at that. And I was just impressed because so many people came. And despite all the attack by the media, but as I was pushing people on the bus, this is my little anecdote here. I was pushing people on the bus, and I was listening to the radio, and the radio said 50,000 people at noon, and then by 2:00 it was 250,000 people they were advertising. That was what the media was putting out. And then a half an hour later, it was 50,000, and it stayed at 50,000 forever. And that's what all the news, the legacy, what we call them legacy media now, that's what they all reported were there. But we know for a fact that there was over 300,000 there. So like I say, fake news has been around for a long time.
Mhm.
So that's my experience in Washington. When we decided, it was decided to have a newspaper in New York by the Reverend Moon, I was pulled out of a hat because Jennifer and my dad was a copywriter for a large ad agency in New York. So they pulled me out of the bag to be the advertising department of the news world. And that was toward the end of 1976, the same year we had those rallies. And so I went to New York, and I
He helped
joined the
you.
advertising
He helped
staff,
you,
and then I
didn't
worked in circulation, and then
Yeah.
I worked. I remember the first day the paper came out. I don't know if you remember, Francesca, but it was the coldest day I've ever been in. And we were giving away the newspaper at the top of the escalator that goes underneath the World Trade Center, you know, in the evening.
Wow.
That was our first paper, our very first edition I was passing. That really sticks to me. It was January 1st, 1977, and the Hudson River was frozen over. I've
76.
never seen it frozen over since, but it's completely frozen over. You could walk across it.
Yeah, it was
And it's an
76.
estuary, so it's salt water. It takes a lot of low temperature to freeze salt water. It freezes about 27 degrees Fahrenheit. So anyway, it was a cold year. I remember that. And then I was working in the circulation department after advertising. I don't think I sold it. It's very hard to sell an ad for a paper that has very little circulation, that's brand new. And I wasn't much of a salesman, to be quite honest. So I got put in circulation, and that was interesting. We worked very hard. You know, we got up at 3 o'clock every morning and distributed the papers around the city. And we were published at that time, we were published in Mount Kisco, which was where I went to high school. The Patent Trader published the News World in the beginning. It was one of the first papers it was the only paper, I believe, in New York that had an offset press. So everything else was being done by hot lead, which later predicated the newspaper strike in 1978 by the Times, the Daily News, and the Post, which affected me a lot because I got appointed to be the sports editor of the News World. Literally, I was grabbed as Francesca mentioned, we were in the New Yorker Hotel. That's where we started the paper. Actually, the Tiffany building came, I think, in 1970. The Tiffany building on Fifth Avenue and 37th Street is where we put the paper. But originally it was on the 9th floor of the New Yorker Hotel. So I'm going up the elevator, and Mike Warder, who was the president of the News World Communications at the time, grabbed me and said, "You're the sports editor." And we were kind of a paramilitary organization. So I said, "Okay." and I didn't know how to. I was a decent writer to some degree, you know, I had some creative elements there, but I didn't know how to type, and I certainly didn't know how to edit. But they taught me in a month, and I was actually pretty good in a month. I was able to do that job. Editing was easy. Writing came later when I became a reporter, for sports writer as well as a Metro reporter. I'm a fisherman. That's what I've been doing for 35 years in Kodiak. I established a sport fishing business. We now have 3 charter boats, and we have about 10 employees in the summer months, and we take people out fishing, which was Reverend Moon's idea. He bought me the first boat I had up here because he said people need to get out on the water because the ocean, he says, is a great place for people to experience God, hanging out with the whales and hanging out with nature. So I've been doing that for 35 years. And back to the news world. We had an amazing year in sports. I can talk about it forever. In 1978, because we had baseball, we won the World Series, and horse racing, we won the Triple Crown with Steve Cawthon. And on the famous horse affirmed Triple Crown of racing, which I don't know if you know, it's the very top rung of the racing world. We had Nancy Lopez, who won 4 straight LPGA titles, which is unheard of until a couple of years ago, when the gal from Florida did 5 in a row just last year. Her name, come on, it'll come to me. We had Martina Navratilova, who took over at that time, 1978, defeated Chris Evert in the Felt Forum, and she became the dominant player in women's tennis for the next whole entire decade. I got to talk to her and I got to meet all these people. And we had the Cosmos Stars Pele, who's probably the best soccer player of all time, and Franz Beckenbauer playing for the New York Cosmos at that time. It's kind of like the fall of his career as a Pele's career as a soccer player. And but the main thing I wanted to mention was we had a newspaper strike, the Daily News and all the big papers. The Daily News was the largest newspaper in America with a circulation of over 3 million, I believe, 3.5 or something like, or 2.5, like somewhere in there. And the New York Times, the Daily News, and the New York Post all went on strike. And that was August 10th through November 5th. And suddenly this little guy right here was the editor of the largest daily newspaper, morning daily newspaper in New York, by far. And what we had, to our credit, we did have the two best handicappers in the industry, Marty Bloom and Jim Fusey. And so our paper went ballistic. We had to publish not only in the Patent Trader up in Mount Kisco, New York, but we had to do it in 4 or 5 other places in order to take care of demand. And from what I understand, our paper was the carpeting of off-track betting offices all over New York City because we had the great handicappers, and we had we were the only paper, that morning daily, that carried the evening sporting events. And a lot of people in New York, they read the paper from the backside first because that's where the sports stories are, and then the front paper, you know. So anyway, I was the sports editor at that time. It was a really hot time. We hired the Daily News sports editor, Eddie Coyle, and he became my assistant. So you had this person who knows nothing about journalism in 1 year became the, kind of the center of the industry in New York. I used to get 200 or 300 phone calls a day inviting me out to lunch. And I think I had one worn out suit. And yeah, we were pretty threadbare, but it was fun. It was really busy. New York is an amazing place. There's no place like it. It never sleeps. It's not unusual to have people like Trump coming from New York because it never sleeps. And Trump, incidentally, is very similar, just to throw this out there, he's very similar to Reverend Moon, because I've spent a lot of time with Reverend Moon in Alaska as his guide, and his wife, Hak Jahan, as a guide, years and years, and he doesn't sleep. I need my 7-8 hours a day, but like Trump, he doesn't sleep. So there's people like that have that ability to do that. So I've always was shocked by that. He even told me one time, he said, I slept more in my life at age 40, this is 1990 in Kodiak, than he had in his life of 60 years, that I've slept a lot more already than he'd slept in his whole. So anyway, New York is a city that never sleeps. It's always active. So it's got that kind of energy. That's one thing I love about New York, and I hope the best for New York. Okay. I pretty much sort of covered my career on the newspaper. One thing that was really amazing was when Ronald Reagan was running in the end of 1979 in the November 3rd election. He was running against Jimmy Carter. We all remember that well, us old timers. And we were really hoping for Jimmy Carter to lose and Ronald Reagan to win, because Ronald Reagan was really more in our camp, conservative camp. And I just remember Reverend Moon called, somehow connected with Paula Gray, who was then the Metro editor, the Metropolitan editor, and said, I want a banner headline that says Reagan by landslide, not after the election, the day of the election, right? So Paula goes, you got to be kidding me, because Carter was supposed to win by a landslide. That was all the projections, the polls, right? the total trustworthy poll. So anyway, sure enough, we ran it, and then Ronald Reagan saw it. I don't know how he got a hold of it, but he has a hands on the AP wire service picked it up. He's holding the paper up like this: Reagan by landslide the day of the election. And I thought that was amazing that we actually published it, because it would have been a really good fake news story, but it turned out it was prophetic on his part. He said he was the 40th president, and that's really from Francesca likes numerology there. It's an important number in the Bible. So he says it's separation from, whatever. So 40th president. So I thought that was pretty cool. I wish that's something very noteworthy. So we created the paper, as Francesca said, to be an alternative voice, to let the spiritual side speak instead of the more humanistic side, which would be the legacy media. That's as far as I'll go into politics right there. But I believe we had a pretty good effect. And a few years ago, it was 3 years ago, I had Charlie Hurt on my boat for 3 days, and his son Henry. And we were talking a little bit about that. And he was texting with Tucker Carlson at the time, who Tucker told him, don't worry about it, because we were going to go fishing on the river. He said, the bears up here are really well fed. But anyway, I felt like this is family. I felt like here, I'm just going to say, I can relate to anybody in the conservative news media as being kind of like a parent, because we did create, and along with the Washington Times, which came about as in 1982. So about roughly 5 years after the news world, Reverend Moon created the Washington Times, and Charlie Hurt was, for many years, I'm sure a lot of people here know him. He was hi, Ray McCready. We worked together I'm just looking at who's here. We worked together in the circulation department. Yeah, Charlie Hurt was the op-ed editor for the Washington Times, and now he's a Fox News pundit. And I look at all those people. I read their like I read Shannon Bream's autobiography. I read a lot of the stuff from that network, and I relate to those as almost like brothers and sisters, like spiritual kids, because we have the same kind of faith-oriented point of view. So I'm very proud of what I'm going to shut up here, because I think it's really important that we move on. And I really appreciate Francesca's talk and her journey.
Yeah.
So
And
mine's disjointed, but I'm a fisherman. You can't believe everything I say, because when a fisherman's not telling the truth, right? You know what the answer to that is, right? His lips are moving. So I'll end there. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks.
Oh, no, thank you, Chris. And I knew this was going to happen. And I'm I said this was going to be a roundtable discussion, and that's what it's been. So no fancy presentations, but some real life. You were there, as Walter Cronkite would have said, right? We have our own you were there people here today. So I'm thanking you, and I'm thanking Francesca. And since we don't have too much time available, I wanted to get some questions from our group, but we could also wind up the recording, and then we can do that after that ends, because I know Francesca's friends are here as well. So maybe you could all get together for a little bit of a chat once we end the recording.
Could I just say one thing on the recording? And I promise
Yes,
I'll make it
of
brief.
course, of course.
If Reverend Moon were to be looking at the world today, he would realize that the unconservative step that he took through the blessings and interracial marriages, it was not conservative at that time. He was a rebel. because he was doing God's work. He was saying that humanity must be united and we must cross those lines. That was not the conservative view. And I used to say all of the time, it's not right or left. We're trying to find that center to the heart of God. That's what this is about. So when I look at and I see these families and the interracial marriages are still going on, Father was so ahead of his time. He said that is the answer, that we can't be separated. And he fulfilled that mission in his lifetime. And I appreciate that. And the world changed because of that example. From my point of view, what I saw and what I'm still seeing today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
And I'm sure many of us here agree with you. Let me see. We don't have much time, so I think I will say my closing remarks, and then we can see how the tech people want to consider when to stop the recording. So my closing remarks go as such. We close today's webinar, and I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Francesca Simon and Chris Fiala, for sharing their memories, wisdom, and courage, and for their tireless efforts to defend core American values. And thanks so much to all of our Zoom audience, which is here with us today, for your time and your enthusiasm and your interest in hearing the truth and the news. So I'd also like to have you consider subscribing to the New Washington Times and having it delivered to your inbox every day, and following them on social media like X and Facebook. The commentary pages alone are worth the price. And of course, when it warms up, go fishing. So those are my closing remarks, and I believe I will hand it over to, let's see, who can close the actual recording? Is that you, Pierre? He's talking on the phone.
Or you could just leave the recorder running and the editor will.
Okay. Okay. I'll leave the recording going. And would anybody in the audience like to say something? Vicki Phelps puts up her hand.
Jennifer, I would also after Vicki.
Okay, sure. Vicki, are you muted? Does she have to be unmuted by the tech guy, or she can do that herself?
Yourself.
It doesn't say she's muted.
Speak, Vicki. Oh, her sound is not working.
Yeah. Your sound isn't working.
Can't hear you, Vicki.
Sorry.
Check your audio control, lower left.
Microphone with the X. That's how she can tell her that's what she needs to
Vicki
do.
is one of the copy editors around.
Unmuted, but her sound isn't working. It's her speaker.
So much experience as a copy editor. She's one of the most experienced copy editors around. Goes back, like with all of us, 100 years.
Yeah.
While she's finding her voice, can I just say something?
Sure.
Francesca and Chris, wow, it's so good to see you, and you brought back so many memories. Here's the thing, we were all, it was, today a person graduates from journalism. There's 500 applicants for every job opening available, and you spend all your time trying to do it. And you can't get a job, so you start a podcast and live in your parents' basement. But he wanted to start a newspaper. Reverend Moon wanted to start a newspaper. And he said, okay, you be, what do you want to be? I said, I'd like to be the editorial page editor. He said, okay. And other people were different things. And what it did, we were going to do a trial run for the first 3 weeks before publication, do a paper every day up until printing. But it took us that entire 3 weeks to get the first edition done. And it got there about 2 a.m. at the press. to finally come out on New Year's Day, a day when all the newsstands are closed, but what the heck? Finally is everything. And I was sitting there in the coffee room drinking this cup of god-awful styrofoam flavored coffee. And I was thinking, tomorrow we have to do all over again in one day what it just took us 3 weeks to do. The launch of the daily newspaper. But the thing about this, it gave us the gift of competence. I ended up, if you want to be a columnist in a newspaper, you spend 40 years, finally you get recognized. The editor gives you 700 words a week to do something and write your little manifesto. I got to be a columnist, and I developed as a writer. And Chris developed as the editor, and Francesca, you totally blossomed as a reporter. So this thing gave us the gift of competence.
Yes.
Just unlike anything you'd ever say. And you can say anything you want about Unification Church or whatever, but it gave us a tremendous, tremendous adventure and gift that you would never find. You'll never find anywhere.
Yes.
Today's world, you're just struggling to get out of your parents' basement. That's all I have to say. God, I love you guys. This was great. Thanks, Jen. You did a wonderful job. Thank you for guiding this. And Ray, thank you too, all of you. Vicky, are you there now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Vicky.
Hey, Francesca. Long time
Sorry.
no see. I'm in Colorado now. A couple of things I wanted to mention about that were revolutionary about the news world. One is one of the big issues at the time was the coverage of the developing world. And there was this whole controversy about, did we just cover, earthquakes and disasters in the developing world? And the news world was revolutionary. We started a developing world page once a week, and we covered, good things going on, progress being made. We had some correspondents in those countries, and I was also covering the UN, and I interviewed some UN ambassadors from different countries, and we talked about the progress that was being made in the developing world, which was at that time, kind of unusual and the other thing I wanted to mention was the coverage of issues that we were more, of course, anti-communist, but I had a chance to interview some dissidents, and I interviewed Mihailov, who was a Yugoslav dissident, and had a chance to be at Sharansky's wife was able to get out, and I was able to interview her and other, and there was a Romanian, I can't remember his name, and I still think about these people and wonder how they're doing, and if they're, after communism fell, did they managed to reunite their families. Of course, I know Sharansky finally got out, but we did some amazing work. One of the first stories I covered early as an assistant national editor was the United States wasn't letting the Dalai Lama visit. They didn't want to give him a visa. And we did a story about the fact that the United States was trying to block him because they didn't want to irritate China. And that was one of the first stories I did, exposing the fact that the government was blocking the Dalai Lama from being able to visit the United States. So these are the kind of things we did that nobody else was doing at that time. And I wanted to put those on mention those as some of the interesting things that were going on. I started out as assistant national editor. I was in the Washington Bureau for a short time. I was op-ed editor, and then I was international editor. And then we also trained some of the missionaries who came. Father wanted to start our own news service, and he called a lot of the missionaries to come, and Robert Morton and I trained them how to be columnists, or how to be journalists, how to write news stories and what to look for. And then they went back to their countries, or we sent them to other areas like Kevin Winter was sent to Africa and spent, the rest of his life there. And as you know, until he passed just a few years ago, and other people, we trained them. Rob Kittle was one of our correspondents. Of course, he went on to greater things. And those are some of my best memories, working with those people as they sent, training them, and then working with them as they, sent their articles in from around the world. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. And it's good to see you, Francesca. And
Same here. Thank you for your service.
I had an interracial blessing, You mentioned the interracial blessings.
Yeah.
And then when it was time for my son to be matched, he knew I had asked for an interracial blessing. And he's, half black, half white. So he wanted an Oriental to be matched to an Oriental so that he would have all the races in his family. And that's what he got. And he has 6 kids, and they're all colors from dark to light. And they look a little bit Japanese, a little bit Puerto Rican, a little bit Japanese. And then some of them look more European. They're all across the board. The love race, Father called it.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely.
So
And it's changed the world. It has changed the world.
That's where they are.
Yes,
Definitely.
absolutely. Absolutely. That was just really amazing that, the network that the church had enabled them to pull from people who had actually lived in those countries. And as young people have a different look. It's their eyes aren't jaded yet. They're going in with a fresh look. And Reverend Moon is the only person on this earth I've ever called father, because your father asked you, what do you want to do? I wanted to be a journalist. You wanted to do it. All these other young people, we wouldn't have had a chance. I mean, I got into the Chicago Tribune, but they gave me hell. But father said,